Welcome to Exhibit Columbus, and welcome to the inaugural Symposium, Foundations and Futures. My name is Richard McCoy, and I am the Director of Landmark Columbus, which is a program of Heritage Fund, the community foundation of Bartholomew County. First, I want to say thanks to Indiana Modern for sponsoring today's lovely little reception of sparkling wine and Upland Champagne Velvet beer. I'm really glad to have Indiana Modern help us out here. They are, it's an affinity group of Indiana Landmarks, the nation's largest statewide preservation organization. And I know that a number of folks from Indiana Landmarks are here, including Marsh Davis, the president, Mark Galassi, Greg Sekula, all folks that have helped Columbus over a number of years and care deeply about this place. And so I thank them all for their support, and I thank Indiana Modern for providing us such a fun way to start this event. So we call Exhibit Columbus an annual exploration of architecture, art, design, and community. It is a new and ambitious effort that will alternate programming between symposium and exhibition years. We created this symposium to inform you about the values that built Columbus while making it accessible to new audiences through new ideas. We had an excellent day today exploring both the foundations of this community and modernism in general. I hope last night also you had a chance to see the gallery exhibition opening 10, the Miller Prize competition finalists over at the IU Center for Art and Design. This exhibition will give you an engaging introduction to the 10 J. Irwin and Xenia S. Miller Prize competition finalists, all of which are here this weekend. So the Miller Prize competition is the centerpiece of Exhibit Columbus. Over this weekend, we are getting to know all of these finalists, and also they are getting to know us as they're interwoven into the symposium. So Foundations and Future was put together and co-chaired by Tricia Gilson of the Columbus, Indiana Architectural Archives here in town. And Kevin Klinger, sorry, I'm just getting through a few animations. Kevin Klinger of the Institute for Digital Fabrication at Ball State University, and Michelangelo Sabatino, director of the PhD program at the Illinois Institute of Technology in Chicago. Each of these three has assembled a unique session with an amazing lineup of speakers. So tomorrow at First Christian Church, I hope you'll come back and hear an amazing session on the future of fabrication, the future of making and advanced engineering. I think too often Indiana gets the reputation of being a corn state. I think this is actually a state of makers and doers. And so I think tomorrow you hear a lot about some new folks doing that. And I encourage you also to stay all the way to the end tomorrow, because at the closing session, we're going to feature the entire Exhibit Columbus curatorial team discussing what the exhibition will look like in 2017. And as a special encouragement for you to stay in the last session tomorrow, we're going to announce the jury for the Miller Prize competition and a number of design galleries that will be involved with projects along Washington Street. So I want to thank all of the Exhibit Columbus team that's helped put this event today. It's really been an amazing day. And I also want to thank a huge number of volunteers that greeted you when you came in and have been super helpful the whole weekend. So will you join me in thanking the volunteers and the team that put this together? So what a remarkable place to have a day's worth of sessions. For our new friends from out of town, welcome to the Commons, a beautiful building designed by Coder Kim & Associates with CSO Architects that opened in 2011. On your way up here, you had a chance to see what I think is one of the best public artworks in the world, Jean Tinguely's masterpiece, Chaos One. For our friends from this community and those that have been to the Commons before, I think you might notice some things are a little different on the stage up here. For one, I'm standing behind a brand new podium that was designed by Columbus's own design star, Jonathan Nesci. And what's really special about this podium is that it also was made right here in this town and gifted to us by a company that is more than 50 years old, Noblet Fabricating. Please join me in thanking Jonathan Nesci, the owners of Noblet Fabricating. The owners are Kurt and Michelle Ayton, and I know the guys back at the shop did a lot of work to make this happen. It's a pretty special thing. And you might have also noticed that sculpture back there when you came in, this kind of foam thing. That was designed by Jonathan with Rick Valicente, who also did the graphic package for all of this. Really excited to have that. Please get your picture taken on it and use the hashtag #ExhibitColumbus when you post it online. So we've had a terrific amount of support and help from the entire community of Columbus. So many people have helped to make this project a reality, and I'm grateful to all of them. I'm particularly grateful to this group of founding sponsors. This is a group of individuals, foundations, and corporations that have stepped up in a big way to support Exhibit Columbus. We're grateful to the Columbus Area Visitor Center, Columbus Museum of Art and Design, Cummins Inc., the Efrenson Family Fund, Haddad Foundation, Heritage Fund, the Community Foundation of Bartholomew County, the Irwin Sweeney Miller Foundation, Johnson Ventures, Moravec Realty, Shoemaker Family, Saiho Insurance Services. And just yesterday, I was on the phones with our friends from Elwood Staffing. I'm proud to announce they, too, have just added their name to the list. Thanks to all of them. This group represents part of what the spirit of what makes Columbus great, the spirit to contribute to a big idea, to take a risk, and to try to chase excellence. These folks want to support Exhibit Columbus because they think it will continue to make this visionary community a great place to live, work, learn, and play. They want to help make a spectacular event next year for visitors from around the world to see. So one other thing I want to show you is this is another example of that spirit. This is actually a cutout that we made with Columbus Container out of the logo. It's a poster that's downstairs, and so you punch it out of this poster, and it makes a kind of symbol of Columbus based on the graphic design. It was made here in Columbus by Columbus Container, and our friend Tracy Haddad helped make it out. We're really excited to have it, and it's a fun way to play with the brand of Exhibit Columbus. So I think it's another way to show that Columbus is a place that's filled of ideas, making, and innovation. And so I also understand today that these are on sale at Baker's Fine Gifts and Accessories. And that's a new development today, so things are happening. And that half of the proceeds come back to Exhibit Columbus, though. So finally, though, I also know there are a lot of folks that are not from this community here, but I want to let you know that there is room for you to be on this list. We're always looking for more help, and we need your support to make this project excellent. Again, I'm Richard. I'll be right over here tonight if you want to come and see me. Anyway, I'm sorry. So let's talk about this session. First and foremost, I'm extremely grateful to the College of Architecture and Planning at Ball State University for being the presenting sponsor of the entire symposium. They have very kindly brought their media truck down here and are recording the entire proceedings, which will later be made into videos that will be available on our webpage for the world to see. Thanks to Dean Rep and all the faculty and staff at Ball State who have worked to make this project great. Likewise, Indiana University has helped make this project a reality by supporting it in a variety of ways. In fact, the first official meeting we had about Exhibit Columbus was over in the IU Center for Art and Design. That center truly has been a catalyst for positive growth in this community, and I'm honored to have the opportunity to work with so many folks in the IU system. IU very generously sponsored the reception last night at the gallery exhibition opening and are the presenting sponsor for each of the Miller Prize finalist panel discussions. Thank you, Indiana University. Also, as part of the exhibition next year, we've invited 5 graduate schools to participate in a way, and so I believe many representatives are here from those schools today. I want to welcome them, friends from the Ohio State University, University of Cincinnati, University of Kentucky, and University of Michigan. Welcome. So this brings me to our session while you're all here tonight, and it looks like we've been able to fit into all the seats. We're here to talk about architecture for everyday life, and this is presented by Columbus Regional Hospital. Our partners at the Columbus Regional Hospital continue their excellent work in this community and represent ways for us to take care of our important design heritage. Early this year, I sat on a design review committee at the hospital where we discussed changes at the hospital, and I know that that's a hospital that takes design very seriously and takes the health of the community very seriously. I'm grateful for their sponsorship of this session tonight. We're also grateful to the Architects newspaper for being a co-sponsor of this session. I believe the senior editor for Architects newspaper, who is a Columbus resident, or grew up in Columbus and is now the senior editor for Architects newspaper, Matt Shaw, may be here. Hey, Matt, if you're here. There he is. But really, I'm most happy that you all are here. We have a packed room to talk about architecture, art, design, community. And so with that, I would like to introduce the mayor of Columbus, Jim Linethe, to welcome you all.
Good evening and welcome. On behalf of the City of Columbus, it is my pleasure to welcome all of you to Exhibit Columbus and to this evening's gathering, and also to thank you for your attendance and your attention. You see, our community has over 70 noteworthy structures, buildings, landscapes, and public art. They represent a tremendous legacy of excellence in art and architecture. We live with them every day, but it is important that we do more with them than simply marvel at their beauty. How can we use them to inform, to inspire, to innovate? With this building, for example, what design challenges was the architect trying to solve? How does the interior of this space affect your experience? And what will buildings look like in the future when we are more wireless than we are today, and we have, what do you call them? Driverless vehicles? Yeah, I'm really with it. But as demands change, as times change, how will we change, the way we design our buildings and their interior spaces? And that's part of what we want to try to focus on this weekend. So all of you can help us. We believe that this weekend will help Columbus focus on how we use our tremendous legacy of art and architecture. And we thank you for your participation, and I look forward to the evening. Thank you.
Well, so to kick off the session, I'm going to invite Michelangelo Sabatino back up. And Michelangelo is an architect and a historian whose research broadly addresses intersection between culture, technology, and design in the built and natural environment. Welcome back on stage, Michelangelo.
For those of you who have been with us since this morning at 9 a.m., I commend you for your perseverance. For those who have just joined us, now I offer you my welcome. When Richard McCoy, Will Miller, and I began to brainstorm about what kind of evening keynote session we wanted to offer to complement the Foundations and Futures sessions of this morning and afternoon, we quickly agreed that it should not be focused exclusively on the role that designers played in the process. Since public-private collaboration has been a key element to the Columbus Way, we decided to shape the conversation with the voices of different stakeholders. For those who are new to Columbus, like myself, it might be worth mentioning that stakeholder is a term coined by J. Owen Miller during the 1950s in the context of a rebuttal or modification of economist Milton Friedman's thoughts on the shareholder and social responsibility. On March 21st, 1964, a headline of the Saturday Evening Post described Columbus as the Athens on the Prairie. The subtitle declared, and I quote, "Once a typical Hoosier county," I'm not even sure I can even say that adjective, "like Columbus, Indiana, sprouting strange, daringly designed buildings that give an unique antique cornfield community the startling appearance of a city of the future," end quote. What was the catalyst that brought about the tremendous transformation of a quaint town seen here in a bird's eye view of 1886 and in this period photograph of Washington Street into a place of strange, daringly designed buildings? At this point, we need to step out of Columbus and travel to another Midwestern epicenter of modern design and pedagogy, Cranbrook. Its founder, George G. Bush, George. I'm not a Republican. George G. Booth asserted in 1917, and I while the First World War raged that, and I quote, "Art is not a thing apart, an ornament added to life. It is the outward expression of man's struggle toward an ideal," end quote. To be sure, Columbus is a town in which art, architecture, design, and life converge in remarkable ways. Here in the cornfields of the Midwest, a cultural, economic, and aesthetic project emerged whose depth and ambition challenge the idea that experimentation and innovation occurs only in large cities. Since 1957, when the Cummins Foundation launched the architecture program with the Lillian Schmidt Elementary School designed by Chicago-based architect Harry Weiss, an unprecedented public-private partnership began that has made Columbus into a modern-day utopia that can still teach much to the rest of the nation and world. Unlike paternalistic approaches to spatial politics in company towns of the 19th century in which there was limited or no shared governance, from its inception, the Columbus Way has been based upon the idea of collaboration and multi-voices. To be sure, even strategies that seem elitist and shrouded with mystery, like the process surrounding additions to the architecture program list, are based on a desire to protect the meritocratic principles underlying its inception. In 1953, just 4 years prior to the launch of the architecture program, Robert Goldwater's MoMA exhibition and catalog entitled Modern Art in Life set out to demonstrate, and I quote, "the shape of countless objects of everyday environment are related to or derived from modern painting and sculpture, and that modern art is an intrinsic part of modern living," end quote. In order to emphasize overlaps between objects of the everyday environment and art, Paul Rand's exhibition catalog of 1953 creates a playful analogy between utilitarian objects such as a fork and knife and a palette and paintbrush. Rand is a graphic designer who shaped Cummins' branding and Columbus identity for many years. Decades after producing the cover of Goldwater's exhibition catalog in 1953, Rand designed corporate communication products like the one we see on the right to reflect the identity of a company that values excellence in all aspects of its output. The relationship between art, industry, and everyday life is particularly apt given Cummins' history. Yet, there is a dark side here too, especially for those who understood the relationship in ideological rather than metaphorical terms. In his influential book, Art and Industry, published in 1936, English art historian and critic Herbert Reed compared Walter Gropius's rationalist Dammerstock colony housing in Karlsruhe to a dehumanizing circuit board. It is in another MoMA exhibition, this time curated by Philip Johnson in 1934, shortly after his International Style exhibition launched the soon-to-be debated idea that modern architecture should have no relationship to the specificities of context, physical, social, or otherwise, that heralded the then revolutionary idea that even a ball bearing or a propeller could and should be art. Despite the high concentration of architect-designed buildings, Columbus is not a museum. Everyday buildings, from churches, factories, and post offices to schools and banks, are an opportunity to transform the ordinary into the extraordinary. While Eliel Saarinen's first Christian church, completed in 1942, predates the architecture program, it served as a catalyst for the introduction of modernism in Columbus. With its gentle monumentality and its skillful reconfiguration of the urban landscape, First Christian Church set the bar high. It is fitting that Eliel's son, Arrow, took the church type to new heights with his North Christian Church, completed in 1964. Significantly, this church relies on the expertise of Dan Kiley, one of America's greatest modernist landscape architects. Banks figure prominently in the urban landscape of Columbus, surrounded by the lofty and ubiquitous honey locust tree, whose contribution to modern landscape my colleague Ron Henderson eloquently described this morning. Eero Saarinen's Irwin Union Bank of 1954 is a statement of continuity with the 19th century urban fabric of Washington Street. In nearby Hope, Harry Weiss's modernist branch bank, completed in 1958, eloquently and modestly enhances the existing town square. In In a much less defined urban context, Deborah Burke's Irwin Union Bank and Creekview deploy subtle urban strategies and modern materials to design a building as billboard. In the place of bricks used in her library at Hope, next to the Weiss designed bank, Burke deploys a decidedly modern material like light and structural channel glass. Schools also figure prominently in the design ethos of Columbus. Because of his classical education, J. Irwin Miller was a broad thinker who understood the potential of modern design to exert a powerful influence over society and its youngest, children. He stated, and I quote, "Every one of us lives and moves all his life with the limitations, sight, and influence of architecture, at home, at school, at church, and at work. The influence of architecture with which we are surrounded in our youth affects our lives, our standards, our tastes when we are grown, just as the influence of the parents and teachers with which we are surrounded in our youth affects us as adults," end quote. This morning, my colleague Alexander Lang described the Mabel McDowell Adult Educational Center seen here, opened in 1960, designed by John Carl Warnicki, as and I quote, "a Japanese village dropped on a flat Indiana field." Following the model of Crow Island School by Sadin and Perkins, Edward Larrabee Barnes' W.D. Richard Elementary School, completed in 1965, brings an inviting domestic scale with individual pavilions that are part of the greater whole. Under the shade of a nearby tree, Italo-American artist Costantino Nivola's archaic miniature horses conflate art with play. Play is an important aspect of architectural experimentation for the L. Francis Smith Elementary School, designed by John M. Johansson and completed in 1969. Recreation, too, is an intrinsic part of Michael van Valkenburg-designed Mill Race Park, whose pavilion buildings by Stanley Saitovich create an outdoor living room for residents and visitors alike to enjoy year-round. Houses and housing address the needs of both the elite and the not-so-elite of Columbus. Columbus Village by Harry Weiss, followed by Pence Place of 1984, designed by Gwathmey, are just one of the many examples of how the architecture program helped various strata of the Columbus society. The Miller House, a collaboration between Sadin and Roach, Alexander Gerard, whose contribution to Columbus, again, was eloquently described by Jochen Eisenbrand this morning, is a manifesto of the desire to bring modern art to life, albeit at a level of sophistication that is afforded to only a small portion of society. Venturi Scott Brown's Firehouse 4 demonstrate how ordinary buildings can make civic statements. As does Myron Goldsmith's The Republic Office Building, completed in 1971, which is carefully cited to encourage visual and spatial engagement with the public space and nearby City Hall, with the printing machine seen here as a prominent symbol of the production process. I.M. Pay's Bartholomew County Public Library of 1970 and SOM's brick-clad Columbus City Hall of 1981 attest to architects with very different backgrounds, all pay very close attention to urban design when working in Columbus proper. For me, Columbus is all about the symphony and not the solo concert. Robert A.M. Stern's Columbus Regional Hospital creates an inviting domestic environment aimed at dispelling anxiety associated with health care. Deborah Burke's Hope Branch Library is an example of how understated yet thoughtful design can serve as a glue for community. Architects of different linguistic proclivities who have been invited to work here soon come to realize that new additions must dialogue with existing fabric, whether it's 19th century historicist buildings or mid-century modernist ones. In our hyperbolic times, perhaps exercising restraint is a skill that is worth developing in all forms of human endeavor, not least in architecture. This still life by Giorgio Morandi might serve as a visual metaphor of a compelling built environment that can resist bombast while aspiring to a poetic expression of collective modesty. For me, this is the Columbus way most worth protecting and remembering. Thank you. And now I pass the mic to a man who needs no introduction, Will Miller.
Thank you. Just as out of curiosity, how many people in the audience are here in Columbus for the first time? Well, welcome. It's great to have you. I've been asked right up front to deal with a question that apparently comes up a lot. How are the lists put together for the Columbus Architecture Program? And the answer is we're not going to tell you. We're not going to tell you for a very specific reason. The architecture program was designed from the beginning to be something that was intended to benefit the community of Columbus. And in order to keep it from being lobbied or the subject of the marketing efforts of various architectural firms, the process is one that we're happy to describe in general, but not in specifics. The Cummins Foundation relies on recommendations from leading architects who've worked here in the past, in some cases architectural critics or deans of schools of architecture, to help identify rising talent that have the future capability to do great work and for whom an early commission in Columbus could be a significant part of their practice. And the way it's done is when more than one of those sources identifies a firm or a set of architects, then they might be on the list. We don't take single nominations. The reason why this process is kept confidential is the same one that I experienced as a trustee of the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, which has the Genius Awards, which they prefer to be called MacArthur Fellowships, but everybody calls them the Genius Awards. I got on this board and I thought, cool, I'm going to find out how they identify geniuses. This is great. And they told me, we're not going to tell you. For the same simple reason that it is intended to be entirely a meritocratic process, and so it is kept in that process that can't be lobbied. So whether or not that's a satisfying answer, that's the truth. I want to set up the first conversation of three today, which will be about Columbus Regional Hospital, with a quote from my father. In 1977, Kevin Roach asked him to write a preface for a book on Kevin Roach's architecture, and he said, "Great architecture is therefore a triple achievement. It is the solving of a concrete problem, it is the free expression of the architect himself," hopefully today he would say him or herself, but this was 1977, "and it is an inspired and intuitive expression of his client. The greatest architecture accomplishes all this with no appearance of strain or awkwardness, but rather with an evident conviction that these simultaneous goals have enriched the whole enterprise and have not simply watered it down by compromise." So we're going to organize three conversations around the idea of the client, the problem, and the architecture, and we hope you'll find it interesting. So I'm going to invite Robert A.M. Stern, Lynne Maguire, and Jim Bickel up on the stage. And as they're coming up, I will do brief introductions. Bob Stern, of course, is a renowned architect of both classical yet contemporary buildings, and was until recently the dean of the School of Architecture at Yale University. Lynne Maguire is currently the president of Maguire and Associates Consulting and the head of innovation strategy at Columbus Regional Health, and was on the client committee working with Bob Stern and his colleagues when the hospital was designed. And Jim Bickel is the president and CEO of Columbus Regional Health, who was not on the client committee at the time it was designed, but is now responsible for the building. So, and you'll see this pattern repeated. We've got the original architect represented with the original client and the current people responsible for the building. And in the interests of full disclosure, Lynne Maguire is also my wife. Okay. So, Lynne, as the representative of the original client, can you briefly describe the context of the hospital project and what your major goals were at the time you decided to apply for the Cummins Architecture Program and do a new project?
Sure. It's interesting now, 25 years later, where we're all used to having this amazingly beautiful hospital and campus, to think what everything looked like back in the 1980s. But let me set the context a little. And yeah, are there photos that are going to go up? Good point.
That's what it looked like in the 80s.
Yeah, so behind me, and it's an aerial view, so it's...
Doesn't do it full justice.
Yeah, it does not do it full justice. So in the late 80s, we were at a point as a leadership team and our trustees where we knew we needed to hire an architect because we needed some new space. We were strategically repositioning the hospital to be a strong regional medical center for the southeastern Indiana area, and we were almost doubling the size of the medical staff, adding specialties, adding specialty centers. So we knew we needed some new construction. And when you look back at what's behind me, the state of the campus in the mid to late 80s, the original building was built on the campus in 1917, and it's in there, but it's buried in the middle. And what happened, as with most hospitals, is over the decades, various additions were done and kind of added in a really hodgepodge way and just kind of glommed onto that original building. So it was kind of buried in there, but you couldn't see it at all. And so the net result was kind of a really ugly patchwork quilt of architecture. You know, despite the community's heritage of great architecture, the hospital certainly was not a piece of that. So when we started thinking about needing a new building, we thought, well, you know, maybe we should be considering going to a world-class architect. You know, our thinking at that point was a world-class architect would do two things for us. You know, one, they would bring a beautiful environment, one that would inspire and provide the kind of aesthetics that we wanted. And second, they would bring a great functionality, because part of the problem we had with this spaghetti mess behind us was the buildings didn't relate well to one another. It was really hard to move around. I will say, at that point, we were thinking about the architecture in terms of branding, too. We wanted to send a statement to the community that, you know, we are a leading regional referral center here in southeastern Indiana, and we felt like a great building could really help us make that statement. So we sent an RFP out to several architects, and what a lot of people don't realize is that RFP was not for a campus redesign or a master plan. It was for a cancer center and a birthing center, because that's what we thought we needed. And we were thinking very incrementally at the time. So thankfully, Bob's office responded, and Bob came out to Columbus with his team, and they kind of looked around, and they went back and kind of produced synthesized their thinking, and then came back and presented to our leadership team and our trustees. And I remember Bob kind of walking into the room and taking control the way he does, and he's kind of looking at us like over his glasses like this, you know, he said, I know, you know, we know that what you asked us for was a birthing center and a cancer center, but let me tell you what you really need. And what we needed was a master plan and a reworking of the existing buildings, and we needed the cancer center and the birthing center, but they needed to be put in that context. Yeah, so then we had to adjust the trustees' expectations in terms of budget size, right? So that took a little while. Once we kind of decided, you know, Bob was very convincing and the argument made a lot of sense. So we hired the firm. And I was going back through my files and I found a list of, it's like 50 bullet points of things that we wanted out of this project. I won't read all 50, but we did get down to, there were basically 5 different areas. So one, we wanted a master plan. We wanted to redesign the campus, and we wanted to do it in a way that would give us flexibility for at least the next 25 years, which at the time seemed like a really long time, and now here we are. Second, we wanted that birthing center and the cancer center. We really needed those. Third, we needed to solve functional issues in the existing campus. People literally, you can see behind, people literally didn't know where the front door was. We had patients in beds being wheeled down hallways that members of the public would walk through. You couldn't connect from one building to another. There was asbestos. The list was very long. Fourth, we wanted a healing environment. There was, you know, back in the 80s, again, most hospitals were very sterile, awful-looking places, made you feel tense. And we felt like we had an opportunity to be groundbreaking and really show people what a really great healing environment could look like. And then last is about branding. We deliberately set as an objective that we wanted to be on the architectural tour. And I remember when we said that, we all laughed because it was ludicrous to even think about being on an architectural tour with what we had. But we thought, you know, if our building could be so great that the visitor center is going to say, of course you have to go to the hospital and see the facility, then we'll know we would have created the kind of environment that we wanted to create. So that was our list of objectives that we turned over to Bob.
So, Bob, with that simple list of objectives, what were some of the major strategies or to overcome the design challenges inherent in what Lynne just laid out?
Well, first of all, I think Lynne sums it up very, very well. I mean, she makes it seem simple. It wasn't so simple. By the way, we beat Peter Eisenman. I have to put that out. Very important. Because as Will points out, this was a program and is a program for younger architects, and to be able to build in Columbus is a privilege. And so each of us wished to be considered. But the hospital was a complete nightmare. And, you know, if you weren't sick when you got there, you wouldn't. And also, and it's true in my criticism of most hospitals, they're often designed very well for the patient, extremely well for the doctors and the technical staff, and horribly for the families, who are so important to the curing and healing process, or to the glorious moment of waiting for the news of a child or a grandchild. So we had to do that, and we tried to make the hospital like a hotel. And we worked with Jim Fallick and Fallick-Klein Partnership. They are expert hospital planners. And we devised a concept. Maybe we weren't the first, but we certainly were early, called the Hospotel. So you almost want to come there. And one of the symbols was to take the food cafeteria, which was in the basement. You've never seen a more dreary place in your life, where the staff would have to eat, and somebody waiting to hear the news of a patient would try to get a cup of coffee or something more. We moved it up and put it right in front and center of the hospital. I don't know if it's true now, but when we opened, people would come just for the lunch. It was that nice. And so we decided to do that. Then I wanted to make the building fit into Columbus. Now, there are many architectural expressions at Columbus, but one connection that resonates with me via Eliel Saarinen was his connection to Frank Lloyd Wright at Kingswood School, at Cranbrook, and other buildings, the low-pitched roofs that Saarinen borrowed from Wright's earlier work and so forth. And the typical residential architecture of the town, this was an extension of that vocabulary. And I hope it has been, I think it has been successful. I can't be falsely modest. It is 25 years, my gosh. And we also tried to develop a master plan that could grow. And indeed, we did grow it. And the other thing that comes to mind that is important is the bed pavilion. There's a whole theory of whether how much time people should spend in hospitals now. And 25 years ago, they were reducing the time, but they did need a bed pavilion. There was a 3-story, as I recall. Lynne, correct me if I'm wrong. 5. No, we added floors.
Yeah, we added 2 on top of the 5.
2, 5 on top of the, so we had a building which people were inside, and the walls were coming down and new walls were coming up. It was an amazing project, and it was debated heavily in the community. People weren't sure whether there should be a hospital here, whether it should be a pokey little kind of outpost of something else. It was very exciting. And when you're an architect, I don't know what it's like now, but when you're an architect then, the newspaper reported the comings and goings. It was like the latest divorce in Hollywood. I mean, everybody knew. And regrettably, the only hotel of consequence was the Holiday Inn, not my favorite spot. But the ladies and gentlemen behind the counter were typically Ball State architecture students. They knew everybody who was coming and going and who was going to get the job. They were scoring it, you know, like a football game. It was very exciting, and to have architecture so much on the front stage. One last story is that because I come out as a hero, but an unfortunate price. We designed the building to beat the 100-year flood, and we got it right, 100%, except there was this awful loading dock. And I go to every meeting and say, we've got to get rid of the loading dock. Well, the loading dock turned out to be a sluice, and all the water went down, and the hospital was destroyed in Annus Mirabilis.
2008.
2008. The
Yeah.
market crashed.
Yeah.
Something else happened, and the hospital flooded.
Healthcare reform.
Healthcare reform. There you go.
It was definitely an honest hurry.
It wasn't a good year, but it's all back and up and running.
Yeah.
Still doesn't have a proper loading dock.
No, it's changed now. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Thank you. So Jim, you weren't, as I understand it, on the original client committee, but you're responsible for it now. So as you use the building, what ways would you say the CRH building has exceeded your expectations, and are there things you wish had been done differently?
Sure. Yeah, I joined the hospital in the midst of the project. Once it had been designed, it was under construction, and so I was fortunate to do that because I could then sort of get the sense of what the hospital was getting, wanting to get accomplished and what the objectives were part of the project. But as we've continued to evolve over the 25 years since the facility has been designed and built, as I look back on it, and some of the comments that were made by both Lynn and Bob were, I'll say there's been this timeless element to the facility that, and I believe it was purposefully designed to be timeless because, 25 years, we didn't want it to say, oh, that was a building built back in the early 90s. And I have to say that's probably been one of the my most favorite elements of that, because you can walk in today, and even though it's 25 years old, it is timeless in its design, its feel. I think we did accomplish that hotel feel in a hospital healthcare setting. And I mean, as recently as this week, still getting comments from people that have not been in the facility before that come in and just marvel at its beauty, its timeless feel, and they really don't know it's 25 years old. So that was probably the biggest element that I think really exceeded the expectations. So that non-hospital environment on top of that is really set the tone, because we know while the architecture is certainly sets the tone, as what happens within that architecture as well, especially in healthcare, that's important, and it really does set up an environment that's hospitable to the patients' families, but to the folks that work in there every day. So those really have been some of the great elements. The master planning process, I have to say, has also been just a tremendous element as we've continued to evolve, expand as well. So that the forethought that was put into that planning has really made our ongoing planning efforts extraordinarily easier, so that we don't end up with what you see on this side of the screen here. So having that long-range plan has been most beneficial.
So as the needs of the hospital evolved over the years, you needed to make changes to the structure, and in not every case did the hospital go back to Robert A.M. Stern architects for that design. So Lynn, how did you maintain the design integrity as the needs of the institution evolved?
Yeah, this is a good story. So we opened the facility in 1992. It's a beautiful facility. We're very proud of it. But one of the things that we didn't do in that 92 new construction and renovation, we hadn't renovated the inpatient nursing units. So we needed, 2 years later, we needed to redo our pediatric unit. And so it just kind of went into our routine processes. The usual facilities folks kind of took it over and redid the unit, and then we unveiled it. And when we went up to look at it, it aesthetically was completely different than the rest of the hospital. So it was kind of the mauve and teal era, so it was like mauve and teal 1980s hospital peds unit in the midst of this glorious, beautiful building we had built. So that was a warning sign. And then the second thing that we started to see happening is, we have a very employee-centric culture, and employees are really proud of where they work, and they like to personalize their spaces. And we had a history, but we didn't really pay attention to this before. Employees would bring furniture they didn't need anymore. They would bring in art, they would bring in plants, they would bring in all kinds of stuff, and they would just show up in the hospital. Jim and I were talking about this yesterday. He said it's like you're checking into a beautiful hotel room, and the bellhop says, well, welcome to your room, and that chair was my grandmother's, and she didn't need it anymore, So we realized, we had this glorious aesthetic, but we were going to have to work to maintain it. So we created what we called the design review team, and we basically divided the facility into 3 zones. We said, okay, there are the public zones, which are heavily trafficked by public. There are the patient zones, which are a little bit back the house, but have patient and families. And then there are the staff zones, the behind the scenes zones. And we said design review had to weigh in on any decisions that were made about either public or patient areas. And so that meant any kind of major structural change that was happening, furniture change-outs, whatever. We also, and the other thing we did is we standardized a lot of things. Up to that point, when a new executive came in, you could go pick out whatever furniture you wanted. We didn't have a standard for office furniture. We didn't have a standard. If you wanted a magazine rack for your waiting room, you'd go to Target and buy one, and another manager would go someplace else and get one. So we standardized all those things too. I will say our design review team was not popular at the beginning. I know we were called behind our backs. Well, actually we were called to our faces, the design Nazis. And there's still a little bit of tension about that, I would say, because, a lot of times people just want to do what they want to do. We just want to make these changes. But in preparing for this, I was reflecting. We did have this flood that Bob talked about in 2008, where the facility was basically shut down for 5 months and about $200 million worth of damage. So we had to redo all of the public spaces on the main level. And you know what? We never had one piece of conversation about changing the look or changing the aesthetic. It was about recreating the aesthetic. So the furniture is not the same furniture that was there. A lot of, it's been 20 years and the furniture manufacturers are different. The fabrics are different, the carpets are different, but if you walk in, it's the same aesthetic. And so we really have bought into that, and people understand that, and that's how we do it.
Thanks. Bob, were there any aspects of your experience working in this particular community that have resonated with subsequent commissions or informed other work that you've done?
Well, there are very few communities where the physical environment is of such concern for so many people. So it would that it transferred to other places. You get certain communities like East Hampton on Long Island, where I have a little house, and I think Will and Lynne know the place. I mean, where people are zealously trying to preserve the old buildings, trying to get people not to build McMansions in replacement for 1800 houses and so forth. But there is not much concern with new buildings. There's not much need for new buildings in the way. But here, the ever-evolving program of new buildings and the dramatic risks. I mean, the building we're sitting in, certainly the visitors, first-time visitors, may not realize that this is the second Commons building here. And Caesar Pelli designed one in around 1970? 69, so I'm not so bad. And it was a wonderful idea, this big place that things could happen like this. It had very dark tinted glass, which was the way you would solve the problem of energy conservation then. But you could hardly ever look in from the outside in the daytime, so it betrayed its purpose of having an indoor public plaza in a place that's cold and snowy 6 months a year. So somehow, at some point, somebody said we have to tear it down. Fred Coder and Susie Kemp. One dean from Yale was replaced by another, of course, and rebuilt it. But I mean, the commitment to take down something that wasn't working, say, okay, it served its purpose, but not to put up something crummy in its replacement, but to make a serious investment in something new, that learned its lessons from the past. That does not happen very often. So there are wonderful lessons from Columbus. I just hope that there are more new projects coming in the stream. And of course, sometimes the mayors are interested in design, and sometimes they're not interested in design. Mayor Stewart and his wife were incredible when I was working here. They couldn't have been better public officials in the world with respect to the physical environment of this place and going to bat. There were always people who were saying no. There always will be people who will say no. Don't think that everybody in Columbus loves the Columbus program. That's not true. Why are you spending all this money on these buildings? But I think an awful lot of people are really supportive, and I think it probably has had a big effect on young people, although there's probably no measurable.
So, Jim, Columbus Regional Hospital now owns the Republic building. You own Quinco, you own the Central Avenue Fire Station, and you own the State Street.
You have an empire, sir.
The State Street branch that Paul Kennan designed. So how do you see the hospital's role as stewards of good design in the community, even beyond your own campus?
Yeah, we've had a lot of discussion, and Lynne alluded to this earlier, that I think should all of our buildings be branded like our main campus? And we could argue that it's such a recognizable symbol in the community. Should that start to be replicated as we expand beyond the campus and the walls of the hospital, as we've evolved into more of an integrated regional health system? And as we think about even in our local community, so to some of the earlier comments, we've got as buildings age and they get sold, and maybe there's some different functions that could go in there. We've started to think more of our brand around architecturally significant buildings where that makes sense, and where we can be that good community citizen and partner as we think about preserving the current program, building on it, enhancing it. So we feel very committed to that role in this community. So that's been some of our thinking as these buildings have become available, that it's while we've got a strong brand recognition with the main campus, we think we can expand that to that more of that investing in the community. When we think about, well, why would a hospital or health system do that? Again, we're here in South Central Indiana. We don't have mountains. We don't have oceans. And when we're looking to attract talent to the community, whether it's physicians or other medical professionals or leadership, it's often remarked to me, if we can get them here, they see what this community has to offer in terms of its physical assets, as well as what happens here in this community. And this is truly a special place. And it is really a recruitment and retention effort from our medical professionals. When they get to the community, they see what the health system has done, they see what the rest of the community has. So we feel a real commitment to keep that heritage and that reputation, and can continue to build on that for the future.
Could I add one thing to that? When we started the hospital, and Lynne and others reminded us that this was a rural community. And indeed, Cummins, the company that exists today, is very different from the company that existed in whatever that year was. It's so much more international, with people coming from all over the world to work here and maybe even settle down here. Different languages are being spoken. But people would come into the hospital parking lot. There were people coming from farms who, with wives barely making it to the birthing room. I mean, it was unbelievable. So you had to have a building that could embrace these two communities, which were they weren't connected really, but the hospital was a connection for them. So we had to be welcoming to someone who was scared to death of going to see a doctor, and other people who would come from all over the world, and we're used to world-class medical care. So it is a very interesting problem, I think, And it certainly was an interesting problem 25 years ago.
Yeah, and I think another dimension of the problem too relates to how long the hospital has been around. You know, and this gets to what Jim was saying earlier. You know, we wanted a master plan that would take us forward decades, and we wanted a design that was timeless, because at the time we were designing, the facility, the organization had already been around for 75 years. And so we knew it was going to be there for another 75 years. And so it felt very much like we were, you know, in that moment, we were stewards of what was going to happen and how this facility could evolve and how it would affect the community over the next 50 years. And we were really cognizant of that as we planned together.
You know, Will, you had asked me part of your first question about things we would have done differently, and I think we have to sort of apply that too as we look at the other buildings we've acquired, and if they get repurposed, how you preserve that architectural integrity but repurpose it for the functional needs that we have. So we've had a lot of lessons learned as we've evolved with the new facility, as things have changed in healthcare, from privacy and other regulatory things. We have to modify our existing campus. So I think we have some experience in doing that too with these other buildings. How do we repurpose them and keep them and preserve the architectural integrity and continue to get the life and usefulness out of them?
So Bob, as you think back to some of the design concepts you came up with, can you remember one that you pitched but weren't able to sell?
Oh, I had a master plan that showed how this
there was the sunburst.
that would grow all the way around, and we'd still be building buildings right at this moment.
Yeah, I think there were 25 pavilions.
But we did. I don't like to look at my failures. I like to look at my successes. We did, and Paul Berman, as I recall, was involved in this. The hospital bought more land. I mean, it didn't have any land. It could talk about growing, but it didn't have any land. And the Quinco building by Polshek was across the stream, and it was like Chenonceau. He modeled it on Chenonceau, but he forgot to connect through. He lost France on both ends. So we had to connect these things up, but there was no land. And there was a golf course that was coming up, and we made it into I'm sorry, Michael wasn't here, and he didn't work on it, but he would, I'm sure, appreciate that we made the golf course into an asset to the hospital. So when you're in your bedroom recovering from something, you looked out the window, you see this beautiful golf course. And we also built the tallest building in Columbus, Indiana. It's skyscraper, appreciated only by thousands of pigeons.
But actually, that's an interesting point, because we were all really surprised. We expected, and in fact, that tower behind us was 5 stories, and it was flat. And so it was designed to go up further. And we were all kind of assuming, like most hospitals do, you go vertical, not horizontal. And then you came back with this horizontal approach, which made so much more sense and is so much more flexible. But part of it was your sensitivity to the environment. You said, we can't put a skyscraper on Haw Creek. It just doesn't go.
Well, and the relationship of the building to gardens, the little green spaces between. And one could go on, but there was a concern about, certain families were very concerned about picking up their newborn babies right at the door where the birthing had taken place, not going through the lobby. I mean, most hospitals, you have a very centralized system of you collect your family, whatever. And so we had to devise little ways to do that. I don't know that they were all necessarily used over time, but because the community was just getting used to many parts of the community, to a new level of care and a new level of facility and sophistication through the operations side of the hospital. We had to find ways to give it physical expression.
I just want to throw a story in here. At the time the hospital was designed, the then CEO was named John McGinney, who's in the audience. And I remember distinctly as the extra stories were added to the big blocky building there, and the cooling tower was raised. There was an open pavilion at the top of the cooling tower, which everyone in the community was convinced was McGinty's new office. So, Lynn, from your perspective, if somebody called you up and said, we want to take on a project like this, we want to rebrand our hospital, We want to reposition it from something that just serves a county to something that serves a region. And we're intrigued by the way Columbus Regional used design to do that. What advice would you give them about how to pursue such a strategy?
Hire Bob Stern.
Well, I was going to say hire a great architect. So there you go.
Can't you speak more specific?
Hire Bob, you definitely. But a couple of things there. Because we were changing so much about the facility, we also did a name change. We also did a whole corporate ID and branding thing. And there was so much we were changing to really reconfigure the hospital and reposition the hospital. And the reason it was successful is because the substance of the change was real too. We were adding all these specialties. We were upgrading the medical staff. You know, so now I'm talking marketing more, rather than architecture, which is really what my background is. But you know, you got to have the substance to do it. You got to put your, you know, you have to have the right product to deliver. But in terms of the architecture itself, I'd say you really need to think much bigger. It's not just the building design, it's all the other things that go with it, all the ways you communicate. And you can really, and when you have a great building, you really can make a statement. And I think, you know, Columbus in general is that. We always say that the buildings here are a physical manifestation of community values, right? And I think a great building is exactly that. It's an expression of the values of that entity.
And I would just add that the rebranding identity process in many ways followed the same idea as the architecture program. You picked a relatively young graphic designer at the time named Michael Beirut at Pentagram to do your, and yours was one of his first complete new identities for an organization. Yeah,
and he just wrote his, I don't know, he just released a beautiful book on all the corporate identities he has done.
Okay. Well, please thank me and join me in thanking our panelists for this session.